When it comes to tonight's vote, Republicans are telling their supporters they ought to be suspicious of what's expected to be a long ballot counting process in lots of different states. In particular, we've seen Republican legal maneuvers in the state of Pennsylvania today, even today, make it more likely that the vote counting in Pennsylvania will last through much of this week. With a super tight Senate race in Pennsylvania, which could very well decide control of the U.S. Senate, we, of course, expect that Republicans will use the drawn-out process which they caused in Pennsylvania as supposed evidence of something being wrong with the vote there. Republican former President Trump is already telling his supporters to protest today's vote, already saying there's so much wrong with today's vote. We'll have more on that later on and over the course of the evening. But for now, voting continues across the country. We've got a big, long night ahead, which we mean in the best possible way. We are just getting started here. Now, my compatriots, y'all were tired last night. No, I wasn't tired. There was discussion of caffeine and intermittent fasting and stamina already. But I mean, I feel like it is actually a healthy thing for the country that we are inoculated to expect a long night. We are inoculated to expect not only a long evening, but a long week of counting.
Yeah. And I think one thing I want to say at the outset here before we get into the returns, people have made this point and I want to make it up front. Our beloved Steve Kornacki at the board, he will be reporting the data as he gets it. This data does not reflect actual changes in the state of affairs. The state of affairs exists. The votes are cast. We're getting them in different orders. It's if, like, someone reported to Steve Kornacki a basketball game with all the buckets out of order, and he just posts the buckets. Like, all the votes are cast, right? I think that this sense that gets transmitted in Republican circles that, like, there's something going on in Philly or there's something going on here. It's like
found more votes.
It's just all the votes. It's all the people who went and vote. They vote in different methods. They're being counted in different ways. And in the end, that will sum to an outcome. But there's no actual movement happening behind that. We're just learning it in real time and processing it in real time. And I really do think we saw this in 2020, leaping on that process as a means of sort of trying to create suspicion, right? That, like, there's something suspicious about this county reporting later or that county reporting later. They're all just the votes. So we're just going to take as long as it takes to count the votes. And then when you add them up, then you know who won the election.
I think it's also, I mean, to that point, I think one thing that we haven't talked enough about is the disingenuous nature of the critique, right? The critique of the slow voting and of when votes come in and of what types of voting are supposed to count and what they're not. The reason you know it's disingenuous is because none of the people making that criticism applied that criticism to any races that Republicans won.
Correct.
We never saw Republicans in Pennsylvania, Republicans in Arizona say, my race doesn't look right either. I mean, if they won, they consider it to be fine. And so it is a pretextual criticism designed to make election results seem optional, rather than being something that's actually being nitpicked or pulled apart on a factual basis.
And the thing that's unfortunate, too, and Donald Trump, you know, I think people who think that he's some sort of genius are just off, right? I mean, he was, you know, on The Apprentice, he was a decent actor, whatever. He's not a genius, but he did innovate a couple of things that I think we're stuck with, is that he did demonize one particular way of voting, which is, of course, absentee voting, which used to be a staple of the Republican Party. He made that an anathema to his voters. So he siphoned that piece of voting off so that you could then do what you're talking about and demonize it and say, well, there's something funny in that.
So that means once the ballots are cast, that particular type of ballot can be problematized because it will be a mostly Democratic.
And if you wanted to, let's say, do a lawsuit, which he's already sort of starting to talk about doing in certain places where he thinks he's not going to like the outcome, you could say, I'm just going to sue over these votes because he siphoned them off and he said they're separate and there's something inherently wrong with them. And then the other type of voting that was already the kind of voting that people who work hourly, young people, black people, souls to the polls, early voting has for a long time been a staple of the way you expand the vote to lower income voters, to black voters, to brown voters, to AAPI voters. That's the big bucket that's in the early vote. And so that's the part that gets all trashed as just inherently bad anyway, right? And that those voters, there's something wrong with them. They shouldn't be deciding elections. It should just be the people who, if you're thinking like MAGA, show up on election day. Those are the real voters. Well, we now know that the people who show up on election day are disproportionately Republican. So they found a way to, like, use, like, attacking the systems as a sideways way of saying certain people in this country should not have the right to vote.
Well,
that's what their real end is.
And